He wouldn't need to carry people along.
Let me tell you, the role of government, not only to articulate good position and good policy document, is to make sure that people own these documents. Otherwise, you'll have good position papers. When you step out, then people start asking you, why did you even start it? Look at the Malili thing. Yeah, a Konza thing that was supposed to be set up as a Vision 2030 flagship thing, as a brainchild of then Bitenge Demo and Kibaki. Then when Kibaki left, all of a sudden, nothing is happening.
But he did address that issue and talked about, the fear of one administration, abandoning projects of the last one. He raised that,
He did raise that. But let me just say something a little bit on what Kyoko is saying. As a commission, one of the biggest areas that we get complaints in terms of human rights violations on what I'd call the bread and butter issues.
Okay.
Like last year, we had about 1,900 complaints. Out of those, about 1,200 were directly on issues to do with labor, to do with livelihood, and all that. So again, there is a disconnect because for me, again, I want to use my favorite development theoretician, Amartya Sen. We can talk about the market mechanism. But in this country, a significant number of the people are removed from that formal market mechanism. They are not integral to it. It's what Kyoko was saying. This is an economy of the stock markets and all this, but the mamambogas and all this are not feeling it. Secondly, a huge chunk of that money is being lost through other methods, through very dubious methods of corruption that the president has tried to address. On this station here, Yvonne, when you were here with the chair of ESCC, he gave very worrying statistics. When you say like 600 billion of the amount of money, we may be generating all this wealth. But in terms of the maximum use of the available resources, is it going to the rightful people?
Great. So you've talked about corruption, which many experts say is the single biggest threat to the Jubilee administration and to the delivery of services. And, a number of these big projects. He talked about that a little bit, but he also cited some frustrations with the judiciary specifically. This is what he said, and I quote, conclude cases and tell Kenyans the verdict. Then he said he was going to, table cases before courts and others on frozen assets that were gained by corrupt means. Where do you think the gap is in the war on corruption in this country?
I find that contradictory because if the president is going to table the report in parliament, it will be as a result of that process. So to an extent, the courts will have generated that information for him to act on. What Kyoko said and what I want to emphasize, where the gap is the extent to which you are given the institutions that are charged with the responsibility of fighting corruption the full powers to do so. The ESCC, in my opinion, and this is what we've been saying for a long period of time, should have full prosecution powers so that they are able to...
It was in his manifesto, one of the pillars.
Absolutely, and that hasn't happened.
Okay.
What is worrying, I actually even saw today, somewhere in the newspapers, that some activists have gone to court to even actually ask for a smaller role for the ESCC, saying their role should just be purely administrative and all that. So again, at the end of the day, really, the president should back his words with actions that transform the institutions that are supposed to fight corruption in a way that they are able to have a real bite.
Okay, and I'll get to the point where I want us to play heads of state, and if you were delivering a state to the nation, what you would say. But quickly, George, he talked about, that the state has created an active, effective civil society, and he termed it one of the best in the continent. Do you agree?
That has been earned. Because if we had a lazy civil society, the state will never concede any space. So I want to say, if there's a vibrant civil society in this country, if there's a vibrant media, it's not because it's been given on a silver platter, but it has been given on the basis of a vibrant democratic culture, the people in civil society, the media, and all this really going out there and demanding every space. Otherwise, if it was on the whims of this government,
well, that's the nature of a state, though.
No. I don't think the civil society space has been given or expanded by either actions, deliberate or in actions of him. This is a space that was fought for. When it was a one-party state, the civil society attempted and fought very hard to bring some of the reforms that were here. And Kenya grew knowing that the democratic space enjoyed has been a country of civil society. And even when subsequent governments came in, it's the civil society that has played its role, civil society and media. So it is not a space that is being given. It is a space that has been earned. And you cannot stifle it as one would wish. But maybe to go back on the question of the economic gains and the disconnect, I feel, there are few people articulating the gains of this government. It's either the president and the deputy. There are no any other actors. So
but
what
surely
happens?
The ministers had an interministerial symposium.
Maybe it's a nostalgic thing we yearn for ministers who are MPs.
Yeah.
But these ministers of this government are not articulating. You don't see a minister holding a public baraza in the middle of Mombasa or Kwale and saying this is what it means to have this second birth. You don't have a minister going to northeastern Nigeria and defending government position. It's either the president or the deputy. And they can only tire. They can only do so much.
Right.
So that to me, the persons who are carrying these messages, apart from the president and the deputy president, are not reliable. The ministers are letting down this government. That is something I would truly blame on that part. On the question of corruption, now, NSSF has prosecutorial powers. There are officers of NSSF who can prosecute you for deducting statutory deduction pay as, and they take you to court when an employer does not remit pensions. NHIF has prosecutorial powers on medical deduction. Now, you have this constitutional body called EACC that investigates economic crimes but cannot prosecute its own case. Now, if we are all serious about fighting corruption, the first step is to say, give prosecutorial powers to EACC, then now devolve, because the badness or the worst thing that came about with devolution is that we also devolved bad habits from central government. So today you have 47 centers of corruption. Why is EACC still based in Nairobi? Why do you, when you want to prosecute the Murang'a governor, you bring him to Nairobi? Why don't you have an effective branch or in the county so that it deals with those local issues there? That to me is more meaningful attempt towards fighting this vice. Otherwise, we're still where we are last year.
Okay.
We're still where we are.
All right, gentlemen, I'd like us to conclude. So, George, let's be hypothetical. You are the head of state today. What would your State of the Nation address look like? What are some of the areas you would point out, just very briefly, an overview? What would you have liked to see? What would you address today if you were president?
What I would address today would be telling the youth of this country that it's completely unacceptable that the people who are between 18 to 24 years, 70% of them are jobless. So I'll make sure that I address that category. I'll target on the the people who really operate at the lowest levels of the economy, making sure that they have steady and continuous power. I shudder every time I think about the hairdresser in Eastlands who doesn't have power the whole day, or the young man who couldn't shave people's hair the whole day because there is no power. So I'll make sure that I intervene in very transformative ways. Security, make sure that Nairobi really, and the other parts of the country become 24-hour economies by giving them what they need, the security, the infrastructure, and all that.
Okay, all right. Kyoko?
If I was head of state today, the 3 focal points for me, really. One would be education. Okay. The current education system in our country is geared towards passing exams, not developing talents or rewarding talents for that matter. So if you're the best crammist, you'll get an A, you'll do medicine, and therefore you'll succeed. But what if I'm a good musician? What if I'm a good artist? What if I'm talented in other means?
We're in the process of reviewing the curriculum.
That to me would be one of the core message that I will explain to this country, what it means to review this curriculum and how it affects in terms of even getting into the job market. Because when you reward talent, it means the 200,000 footballers in this country all of a sudden move from being jobless into an active economy, an active state of playing football that pays them money. All musicians, you reward talent, an education that rewards talent. For me, that would be key. Okay. Secondly, would be the question of health. Truly, if the nation is not health, if a sick nation, then it can't be productive. Now, you have people who, from the age of 22, contribute to the National Hospital Insurance Fund. And they contribute for 40 years. When they retire, and in those years when they are contributing, incidentally, they don't fall sick. So they don't use that thing. But the moment they retire is when old age sickness comes. You tell that old man, you do not qualify anymore. I will look into the process of saying, kids who are between 0 to a certain age will access free health care. And if you're a senior citizen at a certain age, you will. That way, you reward people for their contributions that they have done. Health is important, and availability of certain essential medical drugs to them. And then thirdly, devolution. We must truly, it is saddening when the president appears he has no control of counties. when the president
He
can...
shouldn't, though.
He shouldn't.
He shouldn't have control of counties.
No, he's not really... He needs to push the counties to use this money well. He needs
Well, isn't that the role of the people, the county residents?
No. The president can't act lame. You know, this is an institution of the presidency. He can't act lame. The essence of devolution... He can't even babysit them.
Yeah, he can't babysit them.
You know, the essence about devolution is to ensure that the pressure that was exerted in Nairobi reduces, so that you have people who can make meaningful economic gains in their counties. Okay. Now, when these governors get money and they do waste it, and the president knows it, and he talks to them like, oh, I know that county, that governor is so corrupt, and the president is also part of this lamentation. I mean, he's killing this thing.
Okay.
He's killing it.
All right, let's finish on on a scale of 1 to 10. Where would you say 1 being the worst and 10 being the best? How would you gauge the state of the nation, George? 1 being the worst, 10 being the best?
I'll give it a pass. I'll give it a pass as
Why
in...
would you give it a pass?
I won't give it below 5. I'll give it between 5 and 6.
Okay.
Because it's fairly competent in terms of what you expect any government to do. So,
Right.
yeah, I'll
Okay.
give it a
Kyoko?
5.
No, he'll pass.
Yeah.
He'll pass.
He'll
No,
pass.
no.
So above 5?
No, he'll pass.
Okay.
Above 5.
Yeah.
I think we as young people are disappointed because we expect more.
All right, so above average.
Above
for you.
average.
All right, okay.
Slightly
Thanks
above.
very much,
Lovely.
gentlemen. George Kegora from KNCHR.
Morara.
And George Morara. I don't know why Kegora's name is in my mind. My sincere apologies for that. And Joseph Kyoko is a public policy analyst. Thanks very much, gentlemen, for making the time to be with us today to talk about the state of the nation that is Kenya. We want to move to Uganda now. Uganda's Supreme Court has upheld the presidency of Yoweri Museveni until 2021 after the court ruled that he was validly elected as announced by the Electoral Commission. In its ruling, the Supreme Court pronounced that even though there were some non-compliances in the electoral process, they were not substantial enough to cause the annulment of the election results. But many in Uganda are still debating as to where the question of substantiality starts and where it stops. Solomon Serwanja puts this in perspective.
The Supreme Court in Uganda has given its ruling in the Amama Mbabazi petition that was challenging the declaration of President Yoweri Museveni as the winner in the February 18th elections. The former Prime Minister John Patrick Amama Mbabazi argued that the electoral process was marred by irregularities and non-compliances with the electoral laws, praying for the annulment of the results which were declared by the Electoral Commission. After 9 days of carefully examining all the submissions and evidence presented by the different lawyers, the 9 justices were ready to give their final verdict.
We hereby declare that the first respondent was validly elected as president in accordance with Article 104 of the Constitution and Section 59 of the Presidential Elections Act. Accordingly, this petition is dismissed. We make no orders to post.
President Yoweri Museveni once again scores against his political opponents, and on the 12th of May, he will be sworn in as the head of state for Uganda. Now, the Supreme Court has made a fundamental ruling saying that even though there were non-compliances in the electoral process, but they are not substantial to cause the annulment of the results. And the issue of substantiality continues to be the subject of debate here in Uganda. Particularly in the ruling, the highest court in the land noted that some of the non-compliances in the electoral process included the delayed delivery of electoral materials in Kampala and Wakiso districts, which the court said was inexcusable, failure for the public broadcaster UBC television to provide equal coverage to all the presidential candidates, and the denial of the electoral results to some of Amama Mbabazi's agents.
We must, however, emphasize that although the mathematical impact of non-compliance is critical in determining whether or not to annul an election, the court's evaluation of evidence and the resulting decision is not exclusively based on the quantitative test. Courts must also consider the nature of the alleged non-compliance. Annulling of a presidential election results in a case-by-case analysis of the evidence adduced before the court. In the matter before us, we find that there was non-compliance as proven in issues 1 and 2, but we are not satisfied. Non-compliance affected the result in a substantial manner.
The same court had a similar ruling in the previous 2 presidential petitions filed by former presidential candidate Dr. Kizza Besigye in 2000 and in 2006. This has left legal minds wondering Where does substantiality start and stop in such a presidential petition?